The sky had been a bruised, swollen purple for hours, heavy with unspoken menace. Liam squinted, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep, pulling the collar of his faded denim jacket tighter against the biting wind. Beside him, Chloe shivered, her usually bright eyes dull with exhaustion. Behind them, Marcus, the group's quiet pillar of strength, shifted his rifle, while Eliza, the youngest, hugged her knees to her chest in the rattling back of their repurposed pickup truck. They were a small, weary band, survivors clinging to threads of sanity in a world ripped apart by the Shamblers. For weeks, they had been chasing the elusive promise of safety, always just out of reach, always just ahead of the next wave of the undead. Now, a colossal storm front, a dark, churning beast, was devouring the horizon, and with it, a low, guttural hum had begun to vibrate through the very earth, the unmistakable sound of a truly massive horde. "We need shelter," Liam shouted over the rising wind, his voice hoarse. "Now. Before that thing hits." They drove for another, agonizing 10 minutes, the truck's engine sputtering, before Chloe, ever the sharpest eye, pointed. There. Up ahead. A house. It stood off the main, overgrown road, partially obscured by a thicket of skeletal trees, a sturdy, two-story red brick colonial, its windows dark, its porch wrapped in overgrown vines. It looked abandoned, yet somehow intact. A miracle in this ravaged land. Liam risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The purple sky was closer, and the hum had deepened into a dreadful growl. "Go, Marcus, go." They pulled up the long, gravel driveway, tires crunching on dead leaves. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. "Clear it," Liam instructed, his rifle already up. Marcus moved with practiced ease, checking the perimeter, while Chloe and Eliza swept the ground floor. It was empty, thankfully. No signs of living inhabitants, no fresh dead. Just dust, silence, and the ghosts of lives abruptly ended. "All right," Liam announced, surveying the interior. "This is it. We don't have much time." The first drops of rain, fat and cold, began to splat against the roof. The distant growl of the horde was growing louder, closer. They worked like a desperate, well-oiled machine. The first order of business was the ground floor windows. They found a workshop in the detached garage, surprisingly well stocked with tools and rough-hewn planks. Marcus, a former carpenter, took charge, his hammer a rhythmic, urgent beat against the rising storm. They tore down internal doors, ripped up sections of the porch, even salvaged parts of a dilapidated shed in the back. Anything that could be nailed over a window was used. Chloe, ever practical, found rolls of old insulation, moth-eaten blankets, and thick curtains. "Sound dampening," she explained, her voice tight with urgency, as she and Eliza nailed them over the inside of the rough wooden boards. The goal was to make the first floor a blind, silent fortress, giving the Shamblers no visual cues, no easy way in. The hammering was incessant, a desperate race against the approaching tempest. Splinters flew, sweat stung their eyes, but they pushed through the pain, fueled by primal fear. Next were the doors. The main front door, a heavy oak, was secured first. They dragged a massive, antique hutch from the dining room, tipping it onto its face against the door. Then, Marcus braced it with 2x4s, nailing them into the floor and the wall. The back door received similar treatment, a heavy old dresser, its drawers emptied, bolted into place. Internal doors, particularly the one leading to the staircase, weren't ignored either. "Just in case," Liam muttered, "if they get past the first line, we need to slow them down." Old wardrobes and sturdy dressers were dragged and nailed against these crucial internal entry points, creating a maze of reinforced barriers. The roaring of the wind was now deafening, the rain a solid sheet against the house. The Shamblers' growl had escalated to a terrifying, unholy chorus, 1,000 guttural cries carried on the wind. "Attic!" Liam yelled over the din. "Everything essential, up there." They had chosen the attic as their final sanctuary. It was a cramped, low-ceilinged space, accessed by a narrow pull-down ladder from the second-floor landing. Chloe had already set it up during the initial sweep, clearing out dusty boxes and laying down blankets. Now, they ferried their meager supplies, their dwindling food rations, water bottles, a first aid kit, a few flashlights, and a handful of spare rifle magazines. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, dust, and their own mounting fear. The last to ascend was Marcus, pulling the ladder up after him, securing it with a rope, effectively isolating them on the top floor. The only light came from Eliza's small, battery-powered lantern, casting long, dancing shadows. Then, the true horror began. The storm hit with the full, unbridled fury of a vengeful god. The house groaned, creaked, and shuddered under the onslaught. Rain lashed against the windows, sounding like shotgun blasts. Thunder cracked directly overhead, rattling their teeth. And beneath it all, above it all, through it all, was the omnipresent, terrifying sound of the horde. A low, collective moan that vibrated through the very foundations of the house. The distinct, wet thud of bodies hitting the outer walls. The sickening scratch, scratch, scratch of decaying nails against wood. They could hear the desperate, mindless scrabbling at the boarded up windows on the first floor, a relentless, tireless assault. Liam gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. Chloe sat hunched, her head buried in her knees, trying to block out the sounds. Marcus, ever stoic, sat against the far wall, silently cleaning his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate, a grounding presence in the chaos. Eliza, curled into a ball, whimpered softly, tears streaming down her face. There on the porch, Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible above the storm's shriek. Sound like hundreds. The house became an island in a sea of gnawing hunger. Hours bled into an eternity. They heard the sickening splinter of wood as a board likely gave way downstairs, followed by a deeper, more resonant thud. Had they gotten in? The internal barricades would hold, surely. They had to. The thought was a cold knot in Liam's gut. He imagined the first floor, now a scene of grotesque ballet, the shamblers stumbling through the darkness, snarling, tearing at the furniture barricades, their blind rage amplified by the storm. A particularly strong gust of wind slammed into the house, and a loud crack echoed from below, followed by a sickening groan. It sounded like the main entrance giving way. Panic flared, cold and sharp. Liam instinctively reached for Chloe, pulling her closer. They listened, breath held, for any sign of ascension, for the dreaded sounds on the stairs. But the sound of rain and the horde's ceaseless moans swallowed everything. The internal doors, reinforced with so much desperation, must have held, absorbing the brunt of the assault. The attic was stifling, filled with the stale air of fear, and the oppressive weight of the storm. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, became a potential threat. Time lost all meaning. They existed in a terrifying limbo, suspended between life and death by a few feet of wood, and their own desperate fortifications. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the crescendo began to fade. The wind, though still fierce, lost some of its raw power. The rain lessened, turning from a deluge to a steady downpour, then to a gentle patter. The thunder retreated, rumbling in the distance like a defeated beast. And then, the most profound change of all, the chorus of the shamblers began to diminish. Their collective roar receded, fading into individual moans, then silence. The storm, it seemed, was dragging them away, washing them clean from the landscape. As dawn broke, a pale, hesitant light filtered through the small, grimy attic window. The air was still heavy with damp, but the world outside was eerily quiet. Liam pushed himself up, his muscles aching, his body stiff. He gestured to Marcus, and together, they carefully, oh so carefully, lowered the attic ladder. The second floor was untouched, but as they descended the stairs, the true extent of the night's battle became apparent. The first floor was a scene of utter destruction. What had once been a cozy living space was now a war zone. The front door was splintered, a gaping maw in the wall, only held by the remains of the hutch, now pulverized and twisted. Wooden boards were ripped from window frames, blankets shredded, the remnants clinging like tattered flags. The floor was slick with mud, rainwater, and a foul-smelling residue. But there were no shamblers inside. The internal door to the stairs, though battered and deeply gouged, had held. The furniture they had nailed down lay in broken pieces, but they had sacrificed themselves, absorbing the brunt of the horde's relentless, unthinking force. They stepped out onto the porch, now a wreckage of broken wood and discarded belongings, and surveyed the landscape. The storm was a memory, the sky a vast, washed clean expanse of pale blue. And flowing away from the house, a dark, undulating river of the dead, was the horde. They shuffled off into the distance, drawn by something unknown, their numbers thinned by the night's battle, by the storm's brutal cleansing. Liam looked at Chloe, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but a faint, undeniable glint of wonder in her eyes. He looked at Marcus, who simply nodded, a rare, small smile playing on his lips. And Eliza, who for the first time in hours, simply breathed, deeply and freely. They had done it. They had built a fortress out of fear and desperation, and it had held. They had survived. The house stood battered but unbowed, their defiant beacon in a world consumed by darkness. It was a ruin, yet it was home. and as the sun rose higher, casting long, hopeful shadows, a silent, unspoken agreement passed between them. This was where they would stay. This was where they would rebuild. This was where they would make their stand. But that, they knew, was a story for another day. For now, there was just the quiet miracle of survival, and the profound, weary relief of a new dawn.